The claim that flow states make you 500% more productive comes from McKinsey. But there's a problem. That number circulates constantly in business circles, appearing in books, keynotes, and boardroom decks for well over a decade. It comes from a McKinsey study of senior executives, and it claims that people in flow states are 5 times more productive than normal. 5 times. The problem is that the underlying report was never published as peer-reviewed research. Nobody can fully verify it, and yet the number keeps spreading because it points at something people genuinely feel is real. So what does the actual peer-reviewed science say about what happens inside your brain during flow states? Because the real picture is both more interesting and more honest than the popular version. Csikszentmihalyi, the Hungarian-American psychologist, introduced flow as a formal concept in 1975, and his definition was precise. A state of full task engagement accompanied by low levels of self-referential thinking, not excitement, not motivation, but a specific cognitive condition where the part of your brain that narrates your own performance goes quiet. He did not actually coin the term himself, which is one of the more charming details in the history of psychology. His research participants kept using the word spontaneously to describe what deep absorption felt like, and he adopted it from them. His method for studying this in everyday life became known as the experience sampling method, having people report their mental states in real time throughout the day, and it is how he established that flow is tied to intrinsic motivation rather than external reward. He also identified the autotelic personality as a key individual difference. People who are naturally inclined toward flow tend to find tasks rewarding in themselves, independent of external outcome, which helps explain why flow proneness varies so much from person to person. Now, if you've read books or watched videos on flow, you've almost certainly encountered the 5 neurochemicals framework: norepinephrine, dopamine, anandamide, serotonin, and endorphins, described as a cascade your brain releases when you're in the zone. Stephen Kotler and the Flow Genome Project have been among the most prominent voices popularizing this model, extending Csikszentmihalyi's foundational work into applied performance research. It's a compelling framework. It's also, at present, running well ahead of the evidence. Here is what the peer-reviewed literature actually supports. The dopamine connection has the strongest footing, beginning with a 2013 study by Manzano and colleagues showing that flow-prone individuals have higher density of D2 dopamine receptors in the striatum, the brain's reward hub. That finding came from a single study and has not yet been independently replicated. Building on that, a team at the University of Ulm, led by Markus Ulrich, published 2 fMRI studies in 2014 and 2016, showing that regions associated with the dopaminergic reward system were more active during flow states. They induced flow in participants by adjusting mental arithmetic difficulty in real time to match each individual's skill level, which was a genuinely clever experimental design. In the 2016 study with 23 participants, brain scans confirmed greater subjective flow during the flow condition compared with boredom and overload. That result has been replicated, but only within the same laboratory, and the broader scientific community has not yet caught up with independent replication. The norepinephrine story is even newer, and that's where the picture gets more interesting. A 2021 peer-reviewed review by van der Linden, Tops, and Bakker, published in Frontiers in Psychology, proposed for the first time in formal literature that the locus coeruleus norepinephrine system may be central to what happens in flow states. The locus coeruleus is a small cluster of neurons in the brainstem that regulates arousal and attention across the entire brain, and the researchers argued it could reconcile the arousal literature with flow research. Crucially, those same authors stated plainly that the neurocognitive processes of flow remain largely unclear. That's the team behind the leading neuroscience framework on flow, being candid about how much is still unsettled, which is exactly the kind of honesty that tends to get edited out of popular accounts. What about the remaining three chemicals? Serotonin, anandamide, and endorphins. This is where the evidence thins considerably. The Ulrich Lab's work suggested that serotonergic output from the dorsal raphe nucleus may help quiet the default mode network during flow, which is the brain network responsible for self-referential thinking, and that would fit neatly with the broader picture. But it remains a proposal from a single lab, not an independently established mechanism. Endorphins, meanwhile, have had a difficult few years in the research. A 2021 human study published in Psychoneuroendocrinology gave participants a drug that blocks opioid receptors entirely and then had them exercise. The euphoria and reduced stress associated with running still occurred, despite the endorphin pathway being blocked. That doesn't prove endorphins are irrelevant to flow, but it does complicate the story in ways the popular framework hasn't caught up with. Which brings us to anandamide, arguably the most interesting entry on the list. Anandamide is an endocannabinoid, a molecule your body produces naturally that binds to the same receptors as cannabis. And unlike endorphins, it is fat-soluble, meaning it crosses the blood-brain barrier with ease. A 2023 review in The Neuroscientist found that anandamide levels increase after acute exercise, and that the increase is associated with states commonly described as exercise-induced euphoria, with moderate intensity, exercise producing the strongest response. But here's the thing. This evidence comes from the exercise literature. The direct link between anandamide and cognitive flow, states specifically, hasn't been confirmed by peer-reviewed neurochemical measurement, and the inference, however reasonable, remains an inference. So when you encounter a clean graphic of 5 chemicals with arrows pointing toward peak performance, what you're actually looking at is a mixture of established findings, early-stage proposals, evidence borrowed from adjacent exercise science, and some genuine speculation. The popular model isn't wrong in spirit, but it's wrong in confidence level, and that distinction matters if you care about what the research can actually bear. Part of the reason the neuroscience has moved slowly is a measurement problem that runs deeper than it might seem. Across 42 peer-reviewed studies reviewed in 2020, researchers found that flow had been operationalized in 24 distinct ways, with different definitions, different measurement tools, and different experimental conditions. You can't build reliably on findings when the field can't agree on what it's measuring, and that inconsistency has quietly slowed progress for decades. The brain imaging evidence does clearly support a few things. During flow states, activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain most associated with self-monitoring and mind-wandering, is reduced. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, contrary to popular accounts, stays quite active. There's a competing neuroscience model here worth knowing. Arne Dietrich's transient hyperfrontality hypothesis, which proposes that flow involves a temporary reduction in prefrontal activity as cognitive resources are redistributed toward task-relevant regions. The Ulrich functional MRI data offer a more nuanced picture, with only the frontal regions involved in self-reflective thinking going quiet, while the part of the brain doing the actual work stayed switched on. Some electroencephalography research has also identified activity at the alpha-theta border as a neural signature associated with flow states, which is a separate line of evidence the neuroimaging work has not fully resolved. The idea that the prefrontal cortex simply shuts down in flow is, in any case, too blunt a reading of what the evidence shows. Csikszentmihalyi's own survey research, gathered through the experience sampling method, produced a finding that still catches people off guard. People reported experiencing more flow at work than during leisure time, and yet they consistently said they wished they were somewhere else, doing something else entirely. The brain, it turns out, can be deeply engaged and simultaneously convinced it would rather be on a sofa, which tells you something worth sitting with about how unreliable our self-reports of what we actually want tend to be. Intrinsic motivation, it seems, does not automatically translate into consciously wanting to be where you are. Neuroscience of flow is real, active, and worth following carefully. The dopaminergic signal carries the most evidential weight. The norepinephrine hypothesis represents the newest serious proposal in the literature. The full five-chemical picture is where popular accounts have run ahead of what the data can currently support, and none of that makes flow states less interesting. If anything, it makes them more interesting, because the real story is still being written, and the researchers doing the writing are being more honest about the limits than the people summarizing their work. If the gap between what people confidently believe about the brain and what the research actually shows is the kind of territory that interests you, that's exactly what this channel covers.